Hello and welcome to my the Womb-Centered Healing Temple's Herbal Womb Wellness Q&A. I recently did a three-part Herbal Womb Wellness webinar series, and there was so much material I wanted to include in that series that there wasn't a whole lot of time for questions and answers. So I've put it out there to the community to send me their questions and join me live here if you wanted to ask your questions in person. And I'm doing a double broadcast here on Zoom and on Facebook Live to answer some of those questions. So if you're joining me live on Facebook, you can type your questions in on the chat in the comments. And if you're joining me on Zoom, yes, you can leave your questions in the chat, or you can unmute yourself when there's a pause and ask a question. I'll just get started with some questions that some members of the Womb-Centered Healing Temple Facebook group offered. They might not be able to join us live, but they had some questions in the group. So let's see here. The first question is about how can herbs help to support healing from gynecological wounding and post-traumatic stress. And I know this is a common question for many women who might have had trauma that took place in gynecological procedures and or during childbirth. It's very common because, unfortunately, our Western approach to gynecology tends to be quite invasive and traumatizing. And this is a result of many factors in the development of modern gynecology that I've spoken a lot about on the Womb-Centered Healing podcast. I won't go into those in detail, but the result being that modern day gynecologists are trained heavily in how to address things womb ailments primarily with drugs and surgery, which don't honor and address the aspects of the womb that are very emotional and spiritual and sensitive and in need of delicate care and responsive to delicate care. So our wombs are very responsive to being appreciated, nourished, supported, and treated with respect and regard. And our wombs have a storehouse of intrinsic feminine wisdom and intelligence that can guide us in our lives if we allow that to happen, if we learn about that. And this wisdom, this information has been suppressed for many generations and is at the root of many of our womb ailments. So this is something to consider. So yes, many women are traumatized by modern gynecological procedures, and for many unfortunate reasons, from certain practitioners that have unresolved traumas themselves that spill out on their clientele, to the historical development of gynecology and how it was developed, and just to the general milieu of disregarding our emotional and spiritual well-being, when it comes to modern medicine, and sort of splitting us up into different parts and pieces. And our womb is where it all comes together: the emotional, the spiritual, the physical. That's why I call my work biomystical womb healing. So the beauty of working with herbalism to heal some of this is that it can address all of that if we approach herbalism in that holistic way, where herbs can not only give us biological healing support, but many of the herbal practices like drinking tea or sitting in a herbal bath are very relaxing and soothing for the nervous system, and can help us, if we make them a regular practice in our lives, to regulate our nervous system out of PTSD, out of post-traumatic stress, and back into wellness and well-being and goodness. And so herbal therapies are very compatible with trauma healing therapies, which involve relaxation, surrounding ourselves with pleasure and wellness and goodness once more, and giving ourselves enough of that to be able to allow our bodies to process that whatever trauma occurred. So herbal therapies and herbal practitioners like myself will be good allies and in your healing team. And hopefully an herbal practitioner that can support you will be trauma informed if you are struggling with some PTSD in the womb area, whether it's from sexual trauma or medical trauma. These are all things to consider, and to start gathering your support team and finding how to heal. And so, yes, herbs can help with that. And there's not any particular specific herbs, although there are quite a number of herbs that are really good at supporting the nervous system to recover. There's a number of herbs that are called adaptogens that help the whole body, the whole being, to be nourished and supported in the healing process as well. And so so hopefully that addresses that question to a certain degree. I'm just going by the first come, first serve model of who put their questions out first, and so I can reply to them. Okay, so I had another question here about let's see, what was the next question? So another question came in about being older, perhaps postmenopausal, and perhaps having had some kind of surgery in the womb. This person is talking about having no cervix. I'm imagining that it was removed at one point for some reason, some illness or infection, but that still very sexually active, and having still access to lots of pleasure. So wonderful. I'm so glad if this is the case, because the cervix is a place where a lot of our pleasure, sexual pleasure, resides, and having the cervix removed could diminish that sexual pleasure. But for this questioner, that's not necessarily the case. So hallelujah. So how can herbs help the womb is a question in this circumstance. And so what I'll share about that is that after a surgery like having the cervix removed, for example, herbal treatments can be very helpful, especially to support our sex life, because sometimes what diminishes our sexual pleasure is scar tissue from those procedures. And so herbal treatments like vaginal steaming, herbal baths, herbal suppositories can help to heal those tissues so that that scar tissue isn't diminishing our sexual pleasure in any way. It can also, there are lots of herbal treatments, and not only the ones I mentioned, but also flower essences, which work with the emotional body more than the physical body, that can help us to heal any post-traumatic stress that we may have had because of those surgical procedures. And any womb ailments that we had in the past that led up to that surgical procedure that the surgical procedure did not address. So if someone had their cervix removed, for example, there was a reason why that cervix was being removed. And I talk to people all the time who've had a hysterectomy or some part of their womb removed surgically, who say, well, do I need womb healing? I've already had it removed. And what I talk to people a lot about this is that, yes, indeed, because just removing that organ didn't address the overall health of the body that led up to that ailment in the womb. So our womb is a vital sign. The health of our womb, it tells us about the overall health of our whole body. And it doesn't, you can remove the womb and not die from the removal of the womb, which is different than the heart, for example. It's not necessarily an organ that we need to keep in order to stay alive, but it is a powerful organ of for many, many other reasons besides just staying alive. It gives us life and vitality and creative energy. Now, we still have all of those, even if we've had a hysterectomy or some part of the womb removed, but we also still have any energetics of emotional or spiritual wounding that we might have been carrying in the womb that caused the physical ailment that the surgery that required surgery in the end too. And we might still be living with overall health imbalances that produce that required removal or surgical procedure, and that will then produce some other ailment in some other part of the body at some point, even though the womb has been removed. So it didn't, that surgery didn't address the cause, the root cause, which you may still be carrying with you. And so herbal healing is a great thing to start to explore to help balance out some of those imbalances. And it's subtle, it's gentle, it's relaxing, and it's something that we can learn to do for ourselves and become self-sufficient and take responsibility for our own wellness and well-being. Okay, great. So some more questions have come in. One of the Zoom participants here is asking, can emotional stress be expressed through the yoni as inflammation? How can we help our body to release it? Thanks. So I would say that yes, emotional stress can be a source of inflammation anywhere in the body. And this questioner mentioned the yoni. for those of you who don't know, yoni is a Sanskrit term that refers to the whole system of female reproductive organs, not only on the physical level, but also on the emotional and spiritual level. So the word yoni in Sanskrit is a very reverential term that is used by practitioners of Tantra and other spiritual practices that include sexuality and that revere the feminine, and revere the goddess and the sexuality of spiritual women and the goddess as something to be engaged with in our spiritual path, which is quite different from many religious and spiritual traditions. And so yoni, the term yoni evokes a whole attitude of reverence towards the womb and our feminine sexuality and our feminine spirituality, including our sexuality. And so the question being, of course, yes, if we're having emotional stress, it can very likely show up in our wombs, in our yonis, as inflammation in a variety of different ways. It can be infections. Common feminine infections can be bladder infections, yeast infections, bacterial vaginosis, herpes infections. Those are all inflammation. Another type of inflammation is endometriosis, where the endometrial lining, which is what builds up and creates a nourishing nest for a baby, but then gets shed every month if a baby is not conceived and gestated. And that shedding happens during menstruation. Well, when there is inflammation enough happening and enough emotional stress, that endometrial lining starts to migrate outside of the womb to other organs and gets inflamed and causes a tremendous amount of pain. And so, yes, the answer is emotional stress can be expressed through inflammation in the womb, in the yoni. And how can we help our body to release it? So as I said before, herbal treatments, whether it's drinking tea, taking herbal baths, steaming the body with herbal steams, all of these are very relaxing and soothing. And not only are they relaxing and soothing, but they require us to take time out of our busy schedule and pay attention to ourselves. And not doing this thing of taking time out and paying attention to ourselves and doing something pleasurable and nourishing, truly nourishing to ourselves, is one of the primary sources of emotional stress I feel in our world today. And so, people say, oh, these herbal treatments, it takes too much time, I'm too busy for that. Well, being too busy to take time out and not prioritizing taking time out for soothing, relaxing herbal treatments, or whatever, whether it's just taking a nap, it doesn't even have to be an herbal treatment, but herbal treatments are wonderful at sort of carving out that time in our day, whether it's a cup of tea, like I said, or an herbal bath, or a self massage with herbal oils, or whatever it might be. If we're not doing that, if we don't have time for that, well, that's one of the causes for the ailments in our womb. Our wombs are very good at letting us know when we have too much going on, when we aren't paying enough attention to ourselves, when we're not revering ourselves, when we're not having healthy boundaries with others, we're giving too much from an empty cup. All of these very typical feminine ailments that lead to burnout and various womb ailments, depletion building up over the years of menstruation, to anemia, to all of these inflammation things that we mentioned just now. So yes, herbal treatments can be very helpful with that. And there are specific herbs that we can discuss too. The nervines really help us to slow down and nourish our nervous system. So some examples of that are oat straw, chamomile, skullcap. So if there's, that stress and that emotional, chronic emotional stress that's keeping one up at night, some of the best things to do are to have a nice cup of relaxing tea. One of my favorite teas to have at night before bed to really soothe the whole nervous system is chamomile lavender tea. And it really relaxes the nervous system and helps us to release. And if we want to bring those healing properties to the womb, we can do herbal baths, where we put that herb tea into the bathtub. And that's a wonderful way to get the herbs into the whole body and take some time to really just connect with our inner wisdom. Okay, great. So let me see if there's any other questions coming in here. I know there might have been some here on the Facebook Live, so let me just scroll back here, get my glasses on. Okay, I answered that about emotional stress. I hope that I answered that well enough for you. If you want anything more about that, since you're on here live, please don't hesitate to write more about any other aspects of that question about emotional stress and inflammation. And then Asia here on the Facebook Live is asking about what herbs would help to heal the womb in the postpartum period. Now, in this call, I'm not necessarily giving specific herbs, although I did talk about chamomile, lavender, some other nervines, because those are generally healthy and safe for everyone. There are some specific recipes for herbal treatments for the postpartum period that are very excellent. And any of these herbs that I've already mentioned to help soothe the nervous system. But then there's lots of nourishing herbs that can really help women postpartum to recover from the great effort, energetic and physiological effort, and the loss of nutrients, and the production of this beautiful baby in postpartum. And one of the biggest things I want to say about postpartum is that whatever herbal recipes someone finds, and I would recommend, I would encourage postpartum women to enlist a postpartum doula and perhaps an herbalist, someone who has some expertise in herbalism for the postpartum period. I do have some, and I would need to look up specific recipes for specific aspects of it to be able to share with a potential postpartum herbalism client. We would customize those recipes based on what's going on for them, because any given woman in the postpartum period may have different things going on. For example, there might be different amounts of postpartum bleeding, and that would mean that we would need to customize any steaming protocol, for example, to meet what's happening in her postpartum bleeding. She may be fatigued, she may be anxious, she may have postpartum depression, and so depending on what's going on for the woman, there would be a variety of different herbal recipes that I might that we could talk about with a woman in postpartum recovering from childbirth. And so different herbal treatments are baths. There are a number of traditional and indigenous recipes for women bathing postpartum that again, I would have to look up the specific recipes, but they're often very nourishing herbs like nettles and red raspberry leaf, and then just a whole various combinations of herbs. And different families will have family recipes. Different postpartum doulas will have their favorite recipes. There can be their Ayurvedic approaches to postpartum care. There's different approaches depending on the different modality that of the practitioner that you're working with. So whether you're working with a Chinese medicine practitioner or a curandera from Mexico, or you're working with an Ayurvedic practitioner, you're going to get a different herbal recipe. But mostly the focus is nourishing and soothing that mother. And there could be things that she needs, herbs that she needs to increase breast milk production as well. So drinking teas with various herbs for that as well. So again, this call isn't about necessarily giving specific recipes. It's just talking about how herbs in general can help our womb wellness. And if anybody wants to talk to me more about specific recipes, I'll get into that in my more in-depth, intensive herbal womb wellness training program that you're welcome to inquire to me about after this is over, and see if that's something that you might want to join in on. Okay, so let's see if there's any other questions coming in on Facebook, and hopefully I answered your question, okay, about the postpartum, that you got some more information that you had than what you had before. I'm just looking for more questions in the Facebook Live. Don't see any there, but let's see here on the Zoom. Yes, we will. I'll be sending out a recording. So let's see. Living with stress every day because of an injury to the womb. Yeah, so we talked about the trauma earlier on in the call. Gynecological trauma can produce all kinds of womb ailments ongoing, and that herbs can really be helpful in bringing our nervous system back from post-traumatic stress from those kinds of traumas, but also that it would need to be part of a healing team. So trauma-informed, somatic-oriented therapists and or womb-centered healing practitioners, like my programs, my biomystical womb healing programs, are very in-depth and trauma-informed. So all of the practices that I share in the biomystical womb healing program include apprenticeship, include herbs that can be supportive of the process, but it's not just the herbs. It's not just taking a pill or drinking a tea. It's also having a different approach to life, to our lives, and really putting attention and focus on the healing process in a variety of ways. And my background for trauma healing is through yoga and body work, so it's a very somatic approach to that. And so I teach my students and my apprentices whole systems of how to care for themselves and to recover from that trauma. And the herbs are a central part of that, as I said before, because these herbal treatments, like drinking a cup of tea every day or 3 times a day, and or giving ourselves a self massage, and or taking herbal baths, and or burning herbal incenses, and or doing herbal steams for the pelvic floor and for the womb. All of these treatments are very relaxing and soothing to the nervous system. And one of the most important parts of recovering from traumatic stress like gynecological trauma or sexual trauma is to return to a state of relaxation in the nervous system, and return to it often enough that slowly, that those traumatic responses in the nervous system switch back to wellness and relaxation and well-being. And so it's really up to each of us to find the right combination of healing practitioners and healing education programs um, to find our way to that, back to wellness after we've had a traumatic stress um, experience. Let's see, can medication interfere in our return to relaxation? It sounds like in that part of that question is a knowing that some medications can interfere with that return to relaxation in the nervous system, and that may be so. It would really be a matter of consulting with a naturopath or a Chinese medicine practitioner, someone who is familiar with the effects of those medications and can help to create a plan to address whatever it is that the medications are addressing in a different way, perhaps with herbs, perhaps with other kinds of treatments, nutritional therapies and things like that, so that those medications are no longer necessary, and that slowly, gradually, the person could be weaned off of those medications and return to wellness and relaxation in the nervous system. So another question is, can essential oils like lavender be used directly in the vagina? So my feeling about essential oils is that they are very concentrated, and this makes them good medicine, but it also makes them potentially dangerous. Now, as far as essential oils go, lavender would be the most gentle that we could potentially use topically without diluting it. However, the vaginal skin is very sensitive, and even lavender essential oil can be, if we use it undiluted, can be very irritating to the vaginal tissues. So I don't recommend even using lavender, which would be the only one of the few essential oils that I would say you could put directly on your skin, other undiluted. But the vaginal tissues are a mucous membrane, so I wouldn't put it directly on a mucous membrane because it's too strong. And so what I would do if someone was wanting to use lavender in the vagina, which could be very helpful for helping to clear up infections. It might be a great ingredient in a formula to help clear up infections or swelling or nervous tension. And it is very soothing. So it's better to put essential oils in a carrier oil and dilute them. And, you know, again, this call isn't necessarily for specific recipes, but just to look at how herbs can help us in a more general sense. But you can find recipes for how to make herbal balms and salves. There's lots of books out there. And again, I offer more specific recipes in my Biomystical Womb Healing Program for herbal healing protocols and things like that for the womb. I teach people how to make their own herbal remedies for the womb in that program, and I'm going to be doing a 3-month focused portion of the whole apprenticeship. The apprenticeship is 13 months long, and I'm going to be inviting people who just want to come in for the 3 months of working with herbs for herbal womb wellness, where we will explore different recipes together, and I'll be available to help troubleshoot as we're making our own herbal womb wellness medicines and treatments and things like that. So we'll explore that together. So let me know if you're interested in joining in on that. But again, I'll just to reiterate my answer to the question about essential oils is that straight essential oils are too strong for topical application, especially in the vagina, in any directly in any mucous membrane. That means they're also too strong for steaming. So so I talk about, with essential oils, I like to talk about bioavailability. And the thing that is problematic when we're working with essential oils is that they are so concentrated. The amount of plant matter that is needed to create a little bottle of essential oil is far greater than what you or I could grow in our garden, even if we had a big farm, and process in our kitchen. So that's my measure of bioavailability. Could me, a gardener, go out in my garden and plant the herb and grow it and have enough of it to make a preparation for myself? With essential oils, most often the answer is no. You couldn't plant and make enough. And do I need any fancy equipment? More than what I have in my kitchen. This is what I'm calling bioavailable. Most essential oils are created using fancy distillers. Now, I have made hydrosols, which is a way with a home distiller with some pots and pans in my kitchen, and I've been able to make hydrosols, which distills the essential oils of the plant into the steam and then gathers the steam, but that's a combination of water and essential oils, so it's diluted already in the water, and there's only a certain number of herbs that actually works with in my home kitchen thing. So those are the ones that I use for that. So I'm all about, can we make it ourselves? And yes, I use essential oils and I dilute them in oils. I put a few drops in the bath, diluting it in the bath water, but only certain ones that aren't going to be irritating if they get directly on my skin. I put them in oils and balms and things that I'm going to massage onto my body, but diluted. And I focus on what can I make myself with the herbs I'm growing in the garden. Okay, so I'm not seeing any other questions. Oh, there's a comment that about using frankincense directly on the skin, and that this could be used alone for pain. Again, if you can put it on your skin and it's not irritating you. I've noticed with frankincense that on some places on my skin it doesn't irritate, and then okay, so that's okay. Other places it does irritate the skin. So if it feels like there's a burning or an irritation, then that's our body's way of telling us that that's too much. And certainly that would be, frankincense would very likely be irritating in the vaginal area. The other thing to consider with using straight essential oils that are undiluted, or using a lot of essential oils, even if they are diluted, is that they are so concentrated that it's too much. It's more than our body needs of those essences. And so when we get to the place where it's more than what our body needs, our liver and our kidneys have to work really hard to filter out those essential oils. And I learned from firsthand personal experience that this can become detrimental to our overall health, to excessive use of essential oils. I feel fairly certain that some health issues that I had a couple of years back were because I had started using essential oils extensively after not using them hardly at all for many long years. And I got really into essential oils and was using them internally and topically and in my work with my clients. And I inundated my whole system with so many essential oils, and my kidneys were working so hard to process them that at a certain point my back went out, and my acupuncturist, for 2 weeks I couldn't walk. And my acupuncturist said she didn't feel any kidney energy in me at all, that she couldn't feel my kidney pulse. And my kidneys just were like, done with this. And so I've been very careful about how much essential oils I use since then, since I put all that together. And I don't take them internally anymore. I always dilute them. Lavender pretty much is the only one that I will use directly, straight, undiluted on the skin, and usually only if it's because I have a cut or a burn or a sunburn. Those are the 3 instances that I use straight lavender essential oil as a first aid. It's very good for that. But otherwise I dilute. Okay, so it doesn't look like I have any other questions. Thank you all for joining me live, and I see at least one request for information about the Herbal Womb Wellness 3-month course coming up, starting in a few weeks. If you'd like to learn more about that, or the Biomystical Womb Healing Apprenticeship, please drop me a message. You can message me on Facebook. You can message me through my website at wombcenteredhealing.com, or if you're getting this replay in an email, you can just reply to the email and let me know if you're interested in learning more about those online programs to learn more about herbal womb wellness. All right, any last questions before we wrap up here? If you want to unmute yourself, anybody who's on the Zoom call live, you're welcome to unmute yourself if you have a question, or type it into the chat. Somebody is saying you need something for anxiety. You've been using something from South Asia, an herb that's strong enough to kill anxiety, but I don't want it mixing with things. It's called kratom. Yeah, I've heard about kratom. I'm curious about how that works and how it's working for you. The languaging being used here about killing anxiety, as though anxiety were an enemy that needed to be dispatched with, is a bit different than the way that I look at anxiety. So when we're working holistically, which is how I like to work with herbs, it starts to change our perspective. The medical world and society that we're talking about, that often has a warlike approach to anxiety. And I was just getting distracted because there's another part. It's PTSD, anxiety. So yes, and so those of us who have mental health with PTSD and our challenges with our mental health, or even anxiety attacks, which I feel like any anxiety that anyone's having is from post-traumatic stress. and some version of post-traumatic stress disorder, whether it was chronic trauma throughout our childhoods, which many of us have had, to an acute trauma of of recent origin or even in the past. An acute trauma can stay with us and be causing PTSD throughout our lives. And so everyone has that, I feel, in varying degrees. Anyone who's experiencing any kind of anxiety will have that in varying degrees. And some people have a degree of anxiety that is very difficult to address. So yes, exploring an herb like kratom might be a very interesting path. I'd love to hear more about anyone's experience with kratom. And as I was talking about before, with PTSD from gynecological trauma or sexual trauma, it's the same is true for any other kind of trauma, that we need to regulate the nervous system and give our nervous system and our body space to unwind whatever trauma is being held, and help to free ourselves. What happens is our nervous system gets addicted to stress hormones. So there's whole lifestyle changes that we can do to start to shift that, so that we can reorient towards hormonal systems of wellness and shift out of that addiction to stress hormones. And that's what basically PTSD is that we keep perpetuating that stress by triggering anytime something reminds us, or a smell, or an event, or an interaction with a person, or a memory coming up will remind us of the severe traumatic situation that's in the past, and gets our whole nervous system looping into that trauma. And if there's nothing happening that reminds us, we're so addicted to it, as soon as we get relaxed, we start to stimulate ourselves into that stress and trauma response again. And that's right, we're having comments here about it's a consequence of the trauma feeling unsafe and anxious towards the world, and that the stress has to be released from the body, and that's where the memory resides. And that's right, that memory of that stress, our body, our nervous system, and our endocrine system gets stuck in that stress response. And so there are many herbs that, like adaptogens, for example, are very helpful. Some of the ones that I take that are quite safe are reishi mushroom, ashwagandha, astragalus. Shatavari is specifically oriented towards fortifying the womb. These are all adaptogens that have been shown to be quite beneficial for everyone and for all of our systems, and that help to regulate our stress response so that we're not stuck in that stress response. I don't know a whole lot about kratom, but I did read about it at some point, and it seemed like it was a fairly strong herb, and that there was controversy about how it might be too strong or difficult for some people. So I don't know as much about that to be able to answer. I don't have personal experience with that, and I don't have personal experience of how, or even professional experience. I'm not sure research has even been done about how it might mix with other herbs. And this is the thing with herbalism, is that there's constantly new herbs being discovered or explored that can that we don't have research about. So ultimately we need to follow our own intuition and follow the folk wisdom that often is associated with many of these herbs that are being discovered as a part of indigenous culture. And then as we take it into our culture, because we need the benefits, and extract that herb from the indigenous culture, we're often missing out on other things that those indigenous people would always be doing when using those herbs. And so it's really important to honor and respect the indigenous people that were using those herbs, that are using those herbs, and create a mutually beneficial relationship with those wisdom keepers, and keep our use of those herbs in context with that, in the context of the wisdom of those indigenous people, because um, they have the most long-standing wisdom with the use of those herbs. And there's not really any information or wisdom around that in the medical fields, or there's been limited amounts of research, whereas those indigenous cultures have been using those herbs for a long, long time and have that wisdom. Okay. So the comments about ashwagandha giving strength and focus, maca and astragalus, reishi mushroom, shatavari, astragalus, and ashwagandha was the other one that I mentioned. Okay. So just checking to see if there's any other questions here. Doesn't look like it. Yeah, and I don't see any other questions here. So thank you all for joining me in this question and answer. And yeah, I look forward to hearing from you if you want to learn more. I should be doing more of these, but I'll also be posting the recording, the replay, and letting you know where you can access that. And I look forward to connecting with you all again soon. All right, take care. That's all for now.